Jordan Peterson owns a New Zealand journalist, Part 1.
Mr. Reagan.
So many of my newer fans, those of you who subscribed after seeing my Gillette parody or my Brains Behind AOC video, you guys may not know this, but my early success on YouTube was primarily due to analyzing and just generally reacting to interviews and debates with Jordan Peterson. I'm a big Jordan Peterson fan. I'm incredibly impressed with how he has been able to transform the lives of people across the country and throughout the world. I've been wanting to do another Jordan Peterson video now for a long time. Okay, you know what? Let's not waste any more time. Let's just get on to the video. You know, you'd think that leftist reporters would have learned their lesson from the Cathy Newman fiasco. Clearly, they have not. This company, the New Zealand Herald, they start the interview with a graphic that refers to Jordan Peterson as controversial. There is literally nothing controversial about Jordan Peterson's views. But, you know, this is a quick and easy way to immediately characterize Jordan Peterson negatively.
I wonder if I could start by asking you about The Handmaid's Tale. The series was very big here, both series very big here in the last couple of years. One of the messages of The Handmaid's Tale is that if you're going to stop the advance of feminism, you have to repress it. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's what that story's about?
No, and I think Margaret Atwood had her comeuppance quite badly. She wrote that Handmaid's Tale because she fell afoul of the radical left in Canada about a year ago and was taken out quite dramatically. And so, you know, the chickens tend to come home to roost. And I don't think there's any evidence at all that there's going to be a widespread movement to re-oppress women, because I don't think that there's the desire to do that on the part of men, as far as I can tell. I mean, I certainly don't meet men who want to do that.
This is a very strange question. The interviewer, Simon Wilson, is asking Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist, to comment on a dystopian fiction. Now, I'm a huge fan of fiction. I believe that fiction can tell us a lot about ourselves. In fiction, an author can explore various ideas that one might not be able to explore in real life. That said, the premise of his question is absurd. In stories like this, the world works within a set of parameters utterly distinct from reality. This is how you can contextualize such a world so alien from our own in a way that seems realistic. Now, you might take lessons from the story if you get some elements of reality correct, like human weakness, motivations, etc. But you can't take the parameters of that world and apply them to our own. That's the part of the story that is fundamentally different than our own world. But his question takes this framework and assumes that it is applicable to our reality, which of course it is not. He says, if you want to stop the advance of feminism, you have to oppress it. Okay, well actually, you know, I don't even think that that is the message of the show, as he states. In the show, they are not oppressing feminism, they're oppressing women, which is probably what he meant to say. But in the show, they are not just oppressing women, they are oppressing women in a way that is so severe that I don't think such oppression has ever occurred in the history of Western civilization. The author, Margaret Atwood, invented an oppressive patriarchy more severe than is generally imagined even by the most radical of feminists. And she has, of course, tied this to a sort of Christian fundamentalism that bears no resemblance to any kind of Christianity ever practiced in the history of the world. It is a detestable, bigoted fiction. Sadly, this is the kind of religious intolerance that is typical of leftists, and it's what I've come to expect from leftist writers and artists. The Handmaid's Tale is so removed from reality that the reporter might as well have asked Jordan Peterson about being kinder to stuffed animals because of the messaging in the Winnie the Pooh stories. Again, I see great value in discussing brilliantly expressed philosophical ideas explored in fiction, but using The Handmaid's Tale as a reference for real-life oppression of women is just silly. I suspect that this question is not actually a genuine one, but rather a way of tricking the audience into visualizing Jordan Peterson alongside the patriarchal oppression depicted in this TV show. If Simon Wilson can conjure up imagery from The Handmaid's Tale at the beginning of this interview, it will prime the audience to perceive all of Jordan Peterson's answers throughout the interview in this way. They are now prone to view his answers with this lens. This is a contemptuous manipulation of the audience. It is clever, but it is horrifically sinister. This is the kind of deceptive propagandist techniques used by the Nazis or the fascists or the Soviets. Yes, I'm invoking the N-word, the F-word, and the S-word. Jordan Peterson's answer is perfect. It doesn't actually dignify the disingenuous question with a direct response. He responds, more appropriately, with a rebuke of the author, because anytime we're talking about fiction, we're really talking about the motivations and intentions of a writer. Nevertheless, the imagery of The Handmaid's Tale is now in the minds of Simon Wilson's leftist viewers. The damage has been done. I apologize, but I seem to be experiencing some kind of technical difficulty. Crap, you know what? It's an ad. If you've been watching the news lately, you'll have seen the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 launch. Those Saturn V rockets really moved. They went from 0 to 24,791 miles per hour by the time they reached the moon. And if you plotted their trajectory on a chart, it might look something like this. Except this isn't an Apollo launch. This is the price of gold since June. Now, Noble Gold have been predicting gold taking off since last year. Their Facebook page has been warning of the dangers of keeping all your assets in stocks for months, and they were right. If you want a financial cushion for your own splashdown on retirement, you'd better get some gold or silver in your IRA or 401k before it's too late to catch up. Give Noble Gold a call today and start your own mission to a safe landing somewhere exotic. See what they did there? Call Noble Gold today at 877-646-5347 and make sure to mention my name to see if there are any promotions they're running for gold IRA rollovers. Who am I kidding? They have no idea who I am, but definitely ask about their promotions. Call 877-646-5347 or hit the link in the description below. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. That does sound like a solid investment, though. Perhaps it is worth considering.
One of the things that strikes me about the world we live in now is that there are a lot of men who are struggling to work out where they fit in. What I'm asking you is that whether you think that men need help to learn what women have always had to learn, which is that you don't get preferred status just because you exist.
You don't get preferred status just because you exist. This is an incredibly illustrative question in that it perfectly illustrates Simon Wilson's perspective on the world. Men need help to learn what women have always had to learn. Okay, first of all, not all women have had to learn this. Secondly, very few men have ever believed anything remotely like this at all. Typically, the people who believe that they get preferred status just because they exist are very, very wealthy. Gender is entirely irrelevant. Paris Hilton gets preferred status just because she exists. John F. Kennedy Jr. got preferred status just because he existed. Also, it doesn't hurt to be a very beautiful person. Again, preferred status is not divided along lines of gender. But enough about the absurdity of the question. Let's listen to what Jordan Peterson has to say about this.
No, I don't think men need help to learn that. I don't think that men have ever presumed that, and I don't think that we have had preferred status just because we exist. For men throughout the bulk of history, life has been extraordinarily brutal. Men have had by far the most dangerous jobs. They've gone to war. They're much less likely to be reproductively successful. The idea that men have been preferentially treated as a group across history is an absurd idea. A small percentage of men have been more powerful than men and women, but that is not the same as saying that there's been some global gender advantage that's characterized human interactions.
Okay, so his answer was exactly the same as my answer.
And you don't accept that advantage that happened to a small group of men was reflected right through society, right down into family groups, and you don't accept that it's been reflected at each level. That men
certainly not at each level. No, I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever that that's the case. It's partly the evidence, for example, is that you have twice as many female relatives ancestors as male, because the male reproductive success rate is half of that of women. So no, there is no evidence for that. And the idea that, the best way to view history is as an oppressive struggle between men and women is an absolutely appalling way of viewing human interactions.
That's a jump from what I said.
I love that he just brutally attacks Simon Wilson here. By the way, look at how this journalist situates himself. He wears these glasses that are pulled down so that they can look all smug. Presumably he does this so that he can read his notes and look at the person that he's speaking to. I think these are obviously reading glasses. But I mean, come on, he must know that he looks like a total a-hole. I mean, this is the kind of posture that is often assumed by those who fancy themselves great intellectuals. Now, I'm not saying that this reporter is an intellectual weakling, but just look at the difference between how a true intellectual giant, Jordan Peterson, situates himself and how the reporter situates himself. Jordan Peterson has no affectation. He is simply attempting to express himself honestly. The reporter, however, seems to be doing everything in his power to appear to be every bit the intellectual giant that Jordan Peterson is. And to be honest, he's actually doing a pretty good job. He definitely looks the part. But looking the part and actually being an intellectual giant are two very different things. And oftentimes I find that a person who is trying very hard to affect a particular appearance, they're trying to make up for the fact that they're not quite the thing that they're trying to appear to be. What I'm trying to say is, I think this guy is more or less a fraud.
That's a jump from what I said.
It's not a jump from what you said.
Let's talk about order and chaos, which is the theme, one of the big themes in your book. Order is male, masculine, and chaos is feminine. You quote approvingly the Taoist goal of walking the border between chaos and order. But you're not a Taoist, I think. But you've called your book 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos. In other words, it's a search for order. It's not a search for walking the border.
And search for rebalancing order, I would say.
Would you say, rather than simply a search for order and a rejection of chaos?
No, it's definitely not a rejection of chaos. It's a rejection of excess chaos.
It's an antidote to chaos, though. An antidote to chaos,
well, because it is the matter of walking the line that's the relevant issue. So, and the next book is called
an antidote to order? I don't think so.
Well, it's called Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life.
Okay.
This is almost amusing. This particular point of contention, the idea that Jordan Peterson refers to order as masculine and chaos as feminine, this is a common criticism of those who want to challenge Jordan Peterson. Their contention is that Jordan Peterson is characterizing femininity as negative and masculinity as positive. This is, of course, ridiculous. Jordan Peterson's response is spot on, but you can see that he is almost exhausted by the question. He's had to answer this so many times that I believe answering this actually really bores him. All you have to do to understand his perspective on this is to watch any other interview in which he's been challenged on it. But the point of this interview is not to get to the truth. It's not to appropriately characterize Jordan Peterson's ideas. The point is to make him look bad. So this interviewer, Simon Wilson, just like all of the other interviewers who dislike Jordan Peterson, he's going to express to his audience every idea that he thinks might make Jordan Peterson look bad.
Order isn't harmony. Order's a state of affairs. Order's not a state of affairs that's by definition beneficial to everyone.
No.
It's stability.
Yes.
Slave societies were ordered. Feudal societies were ordered.
Yes.
But obviously a lot of people missed out. So I'm wondering whether you would think that if you had called the book How to Find a Balance Between Chaos and Order, if that had been the subtitle, whether it might have been a rather different book.
Yes, it would have been a less successful book because it's a rather awkward title.
Okay.
But no, I do think that the idea that what we're looking for right now is an antidote to chaos is correct, because a lot of people are nihilistic and depressed, and they don't have an aim, and they don't have a place, and they don't know where they're going. And that's not a good thing. I don't think that what we're suffering from in the West right now is an excess of order. That isn't my observation, although that can happen.
So you've observed, rightly in my view, that societies use hierarchies or are hierarchical. It's a reasonable thing to observe, I think. But I wonder whether society is also about cooperation, that it's about striking the balance, that social progress is about how we find and refine and develop that balance. Classical society, for example, a classical Greek society would have found democracy inconceivable without slaves.
Well, a functioning hierarchy is also predicated on cooperation. Like, there's no reason to assume it's a neo-Marxist postmodern presumption that the basis of hierarchical competition is power. It's not something I believe.
So this is actually a very good question by Simon Wilson. In fact, I would rate this question as the only good question so far asked. In fact, I would rate it as one of the few good questions I have ever heard any interviewer ask Jordan Peterson. Peterson's answer is, of course, perfect. He agrees with Simon Wilson that functioning hierarchies do require some cooperation. He does not reject Simon Wilson's contention about hierarchies. Rather, he rejects Simon Wilson's implied mischaracterization of Jordan Peterson's own position that he does not value cooperation within competitive hierarchies. It's a fine question, and it's a fine response.
Neo-Marxist postmodern, I mean, it's a label you can throw at anything that criticizes you, because it can mean anything to anybody.
No, it fundamentally means that the basis of hierarchical structures are power, and I don't buy that. And that is the fundamental claim, and it's the fundamental claim of the Marxists, and it is the fundamental claim of the postmodernists, and it's simply not true.
I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of what Marxism might have to say to postmodernism and vice versa, because I'm sure you'll agree it's a rabbit hole.
I love this. This guy just tried to totally dismiss Jordan Peterson's criticism of left-wing ideology, specifically neo-Marxist postmodernism. He just dismisses this as if it is rhetorical nonsense, as if it's meaningless, esoteric gobbledygook. But that's simply because he does not understand the ideas of neo-Marxist postmodernism. One would think that since this guy is going to interview Jordan Peterson, a man who has very publicly humiliated several interviewers in the past, that he would have done his research. You don't even need to study neo-Marxist postmodernism. You just need to watch some of Jordan Peterson's videos, a few interviews, conversations, and debates. Maybe read a few things about Judith Butler, Jacques Derrida, Simone de Beauvoir, and Michel Foucault. I was going to include a clear and simple explanation of neo-Marxist postmodernism, but Simon Wilson is right in the last statement he made here. It is indeed a rabbit hole. The contradictions between neo-Marxism and postmodernism, as well as the agreements between the two, are not really worth getting into. If you want to learn about that stuff in detail, you can type those terms into YouTube and you'll find plenty of videos on the subject. I'll try to explain, to the best of my ability, my simplified understanding of how leftists are able to reconcile these two seemingly opposed ideologies. Despite the fact that postmodern feminism denies the existence of real genders, it does propose that the construct of the idea of genders exists. That is, according to postmodernists, gender is not a real phenomenon, but rather an invented pair of classifications intended historically to divide people so that one group can have power and dominance over another group. In this case, the idea is that those people who historically classify themselves as men want dominance and power over those who they classify as women. Because of these historic classifications, the postmodernists, despite their contention that gender doesn't actually exist, they can use these classifications in order to redistribute power. They contend that there is a power imbalance that was created by men, therefore, redistributing that power is merely a correction based on the assumption that a power shift occurred historically based on the invented classifications of gender. I know that was a little redundant, but it's such a convoluted idea that in order to be clear, I feel like I have to repeat myself. Now, I may be wrong about this, so Jordan Peterson, if you are watching, please feel free to correct me. Anyway, I'm not actually sure that Simon Wilson is not being disingenuous when he says that it could mean anything to anybody. Because, I mean, if that were true, then these ideas would be fundamentally meaningless. And if that were true, then these ideas should not be taught in any university anywhere ever. But they are being taught, and they need to be called out, and therefore they need a name. Jordan Peterson has appropriately named these ideas neo-Marxist postmodernism, and I think that's great. I think that this kind of dismissive tone expressed by somebody who appears to be an intellectual would actually be powerful if Jordan Peterson wasn't 100% confident in his position. But Jordan Peterson is 100% confident in his position. And he's a hell of a lot smarter and better educated than Simon Wilson. Therefore, Jordan Peterson's ideas are not so easily belittled by Simon Wilson's dismissive attitude.
Given that society evolves, I've mentioned from ancient Greece and so on before, why is it useful not to go back to that and look at how society's evolved? In your book, you go back to lobsters 1/3 billion years ago, and that's the basis on which you stake your claim that we need to be understanding the role of hierarchies rather than looking at the balance between hierarchy and cooperation.
Well, we need to go back to the fundamental biochemistry, because we need to understand how important a role our own perceptions of our hierarchical position is in our emotional regulation. So you have a mechanism that's unbelievably ancient and deep, very embedded inside your psychophysiology, that marks where you are in a given hierarchy. And it determines how much negative emotion and how much positive emotion you feel. And it's not under voluntary control. It's one of the fundamental control mechanisms of the brain. And the reason I made the case that it was 1/3 of a billion years old was to try to indicate just exactly how widespread and powerful this mechanism is. And it helps understand, for example, why people are so hurt by status reduction, because they definitely are.
Between the question Simon Wilson asks and the answer that Jordan Peterson provides, there is a fundamental difference in the understanding of the world. Simon Wilson asks this question about the focus on biology as opposed to the focus on culture, because he does not believe that biology affects human beings in disparate ways. This is, of course, absurd. This is the old debate, nature versus nurture. Dr. Steven Pinker talks about this in depth in his book, The Blank Slate.
The book is called The Blank Slate, based on the popular idea that the human mind is a blank slate and that all of its structure comes from socialization, culture, parenting, experience. Man has no nature, from the historian Jose Ortega y Gasset. Man has no instincts, from the anthropologist Ashley Montague. The human brain is capable of a full range of behaviors and predisposed to none, from the late scientist Stephen Jay Gould. When I wrote a first draft of the book, I circulated it to a number of colleagues for comments, and here are some of the reactions that I got. Better get a security camera for your house. Don't expect to get any more awards, job offers, or positions in scholarly societies. Tell your publisher not to list your hometown in your author bio. Do you have tenure? Most studies of parenting on which this advice is based are useless. They're useless because they don't control for heritability. They measure some correlation between what the parents do, how the children turn out, and assume a causal relation, that the parenting shaped the child. Parents who talk a lot to their kids have kids who grew up to be articulate. Parents who spank their kids have kids who grew up to be violent, and so on. And very few of them control for the possibility that parents pass on genes that increase the chances a child will be articulate or violent, and so on. The genetically controlled studies have some sobering results. Identical twins, or any siblings who are separated at birth, are no less similar than if they had grown up together. Everything that happens to you in a given home over all of those years appears to leave no permanent stamp on your personality or intellect. Adopted siblings reared together, they share their parents, their home, their neighborhood, don't share their genes, end up not similar at all. What it suggests is that children are shaped not by their parents over the long run, but in part, only in part, by their genes, in part by their culture, the culture of the country at large, and the children's own culture, namely their peer group, as we heard from Jill Sobule earlier today. That's what kids care about. And to a very large extent, larger than most people are prepared to acknowledge, by chance. Chance events in the wiring of the brain in utero, chance events as you live your life. Thank you very much.
The blank slate idea is that everything is nurture and almost nothing is nature. In other words, we are all born with infinite potential and we are all identical. Of course, we know that this is not true. Most of the consensus that I found on this subject, from anyone who accepts biological reality, is that we are about 50% nature and 50% nurture. But it is much more convenient for certain people to accept that we are merely products of our environment, and there's nothing biological that is significant about us at all. This is an attractive proposition, both for those who are very successful and those who want to be perceived as 100% unbiased, right? Because if you're a very successful person, you want to believe that everything that you have accomplished, everything you've accomplished in your whole life, it's all a result of your own hard work. Therefore, if anything that you have accomplished in your life is in any way a product of some biological advantage, then you have to concede that you are, at least in part, lucky. You cannot take full credit for your success in life. On the other hand, if you do not want to be regarded as racist or sexist, it's convenient to advocate the idea that we're all exactly equal at birth, that there are no differences between us whatsoever. For a successful academic, who wants to virtue signal, this has to be an extremely tempting philosophy to hold. And despite the fact that this reporter, Simon Wilson, is not an academic, he certainly appears to want to be one. So I assume that the same principles apply to him. And this line of questioning confirms my suspicion. He seems to accept the blank slate model, at least to some degree. Jordan Peterson does not answer the question from that perspective, however. Jordan Peterson's answer, of course, assumes that biology has a significant influence on us, naturally. This, of course, is incompatible with Simon Wilson's perception of the world, and therefore, I really doubt that he will be able to accept this idea, and he might not even be able to understand what Jordan Peterson is saying.
And it also marks a difference between you and a lot of others, I would guess, that you would say that's defining, that if it's a third of a billion years old, it's hardwired, as you've just explained. Others would say that actually as humans, we have developed cooperative social mechanisms that take us far beyond that, and it is far more valuable to look at how we evolved together than to go back to the idea that actually we're simply crustaceans at heart.
Well, we've certainly determined how to structure our hierarchies so that cooperation plays a much larger role in them than they do in most animals. But that doesn't mean that that's altered our the fundamental way that our biochemistry interacts with hierarchy. And so the idea, the critics of especially the first chapter of my book didn't read it because I wasn't justifying hierarchies. I was attempting to point out that we're very sensitive to hierarchical position, and that the best way to occupy a position in a hierarchy, to move up and to occupy a proper position, is to play a careful reciprocal social game and not to use power. So
yes, you do argue that, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so my prediction was wrong. Simon Wilson did understand Jordan Peterson's answer. And not only that, but he responded with a perfectly appropriate follow-up question. After Jordan Peterson explained his position, Simon Wilson actually conceded that what Jordan Peterson had explained was what Jordan Peterson really thought. Now, Simon Wilson does not express any kind of concession that Jordan Peterson is correct, just that he accepts that this is, in fact, what Jordan Peterson believes. And for an apparent devotee of the blank slate concept and an obvious left-wing activist reporter, that's good enough for me. I'm very impressed with his ability to do even this.
Could we talk for a moment about Me Too? You've rejected the idea that we should always believe the victim in a rape.
Well, that's obvious. That's what happened in the lynch cases in the 1950s in the United States. The victim was always believed.
Yes, and I was going to say that's fair enough. But why not accept the situation as being the victim deserves to be treated as if she's telling the truth in our attempts to get at the truth, and in doing that, we do our best not to re-victimize her.
Because that isn't how the adversarial system works, and I don't think
but
that we
why not advocate for that?
Because the adversarial system is a very effective judicial system, and it's certainly the case that among crimes that are falsely reported, rape crimes are at the top of the list. So there is no believing the victim. There's no reason for people to assume that when they enter the criminal justice system that they're going to be treated with kid gloves or treated easily. That isn't how it works.
I'm not sure that Jordan Peterson answered this question completely appropriately. Firstly, I do agree with him that any accusation made against anyone by anyone should not be immediately assumed to be true, of course. However, most accusations that are brought to the police are taken seriously. I'm sure in some instances there are crazy people who come to the police with crazy claims, and so the police have to prioritize the claims that they deem most credible first, obviously. But, if we're going to insist that the police take every bizarre claim that is ever brought to their attention seriously, then we will be demanding that the police often prioritize obviously false claims over obviously valid ones. A quick search on the internet led me to this amazing list of hilarious police reports. Mountain View, Friday, Walmart. Police receive a report of a newborn infant found in a trash can. Upon investigation, officers discover it was a burrito. 5:00 p.m. Police were called to Market Square for a report about a suspicious coin. Investigating officer reported it was a quarter. Police solve case of the missing bacon. A Grand Rapids resident told police last week that somebody had entered his home during the night and taken 5 pounds of bacon from the refrigerator. Upon further investigation, police discovered his wife had gotten up for a late-night snack, but was afraid to admit it. 5 pounds! A caller reported at 7:14 p.m. that someone was on a porch yelling "help" from a residence on Bank Street. Officers responded and learned that the person was calling a cat that is named Help. The cat's name was Help. I wonder if these are real or if this is just crap that people have It looks real. I mean, they look like real newspaper clippings. A man reported that a squirrel was running in circles on Davis Drive and not sure if it was sick or had been hit by a car. An officer responded, and as he drove on the street, he he ran over the squirrel. I guess we'll never know why the squirrel was running around in circles. That's too funny. All right. Police were informed February 25th by a resident of the 1000 block of Raritan Drive that a family in the area is taking over the minds of local dogs and turning them against their owners. Police were advised by the person that the only way to protect a dog is to install an anti-force field onto its head before letting the animal go outside. Okay, so this is kind of, this one right here, this is the kind of thing that I imagine, maybe police don't prioritize that specific police report. Now, this is not to say that police should dismiss rape accusations, but the police need to exercise some discretion about how they prioritize police reports. Of course, serious claims must be taken seriously. This guy is assuming that rape accusations are regularly ignored, not investigated, or taken seriously. This is, again, absurd. This guy seems to say a lot of absurd things. Not only are rape accusations taken seriously by police, but oftentimes false accusations end up ruining the lives of innocent men. It is certainly a more serious problem in our society that men are falsely accused of rape than they get away with rape. Of course, both are serious problems, but the solution Simon Wilson proposes to combat rape would exacerbate the problem of lives ruined through false accusations. He, as does everyone in the Me Too movement, he looks at only one set of victims, and he completely ignores the other set of victims. This is in perfect keeping with the leftist perspective that women are oppressed and men are oppressors. It is, as Jordan Peterson proposed earlier in this interview, an appalling way of looking at human interaction.
That isn't how it works.
We also know that we have a major social issue in this country, especially domestic violence is a really big issue. Most police call-outs in this country are to do with what they call domestic harm.
Yes.
It's not an issue that we're going to resolve through the traditional adversarial approach of the courts and having victims understand they're going to be re-victimized.
Most of that would be best addressed by dealing with alcoholism, because most of the cause of domestic violence is alcohol related.
It's strongly related.
Yes, and so we're not looking at the proper causes.
But it's not just looking at alcoholism.
It's 50% of violent crimes are a consequence of alcohol intoxication, so it's a huge contributor.
Of course, how the police behave, how the courts behave is surely also part of that.
Perhaps.
Now, I had a little bit of trouble following what Simon Wilson was trying to propose here. If I have misunderstood his intentions or his motivations, please correct me in the comment section. This series of questions seems to me to indicate that Simon Wilson does not believe that the adversarial justice system is fair or appropriate, at least not in certain cases such as claims of rape. Now, an adversarial justice system simply means that there is a prosecution and there is a defense. There is an accused and there is an accuser. And in the case of American law, and I think the case of most civilized countries, the accused is presumed innocent until proven guilty. The reason for this should be self-evident, but for the Simon Wilson types for whom this may not be self-evident, it is because it is a far greater evil to punish an innocent man than it is to let 10 guilty men go free. I think that in the end, what Simon Wilson was really getting at, but what he hesitated to say flat out, is that he believes that the justice system is made up of a bunch of racist, misogynist a-holes. Apparently, he thinks that the police, and maybe judges and lawyers, are less sympathetic to women and minorities than they are to the white male, or rather the leftist caricature of the privileged white male.
I wonder whether this is an example of something else that people criticize you for, that in talking about Me Too and talking about victims and allegations of rape and so on, you've moved the debate to an extreme. There are false accusations, but that's not a very useful, is that a very useful place really to have the argument?
I don't think I have moved the debate there. What I've done mostly is to tell men that they should act honorably in relationship to their sexual relationships with women, and I'm quite a traditionalist in that manner. And so I think that the best way to regulate sexual behavior in general is to return to or to value long-term committed monogamous relationships, and that's basically the fundamental solution.
And you have argued that.
And it has very little to do with Me Too, and I haven't commented much about Me Too in general.
So Jordan Peterson has moved the debate to an extreme because he acknowledges that there are such things as false accusations. How is that an extreme? There are false accusations. That's real. That's not unusual, and it is a problem. If this were not a real thing, if this never actually happened, or if it was extremely rare, I could accept that this is an extreme position. I wouldn't even use the word extreme. I would use the word irrelevant. But this is totally relevant. There are two sets of victims. Ignoring that fact is a far more absurd thing than to accept that fact. Ignoring the problem of false rape accusations, that is an extreme position. Simon Wilson, you are the extremist, not Jordan Peterson.
But when you do, and when you have, there's a subtext which is a completely different message that you send to people. It sends signals that women are liars, that men's sexual behaviour isn't offensive, is never offensive, that it's a plot. Those messages are carried as subtext.
What evidence do you have that that's the sort of thing that I've put forward? I've said almost nothing about Me Too, except for the danger of believing the victim automatically, and that's obviously a danger. So I have nothing against the Me Too movement, apart from the fact that it has the proclivity to go too far, like most spontaneous mob movements.
Yes, but defining it as the movement that goes too far is doing that.
That goes too far.
Yes, but that's why settle on that as the definition of the Me Too movement rather than something. Well, okay.
This is hilarious. Jordan Peterson shuts him down with two words. I haven't. This guy's pretty funny because he's a little bit better than, say, Kathy Newman about characterizing what Jordan Peterson says within this interview. But he's just as bad as every other interviewer when it comes to mischaracterizing Jordan Peterson's views within his questions. His questions assume a lot of crazy things about Jordan Peterson that totally mischaracterize him and his views. He says that Jordan Peterson's views send signals that women are liars and that men's sexual behavior is never offensive. These characterizations are totally laughable. He's claiming that Jordan Peterson holds views that literally no one holds. No one in the world believes the things that this guy is insisting Jordan Peterson believes. I think this goes back to The Handmaid's Tale. It's like this guy watched a bunch of episodes of Handmaid's Tale and then applied all the most oppressive, sexist ideas to the real-life right wing throughout the developed world, and now he's formulating questions to Jordan Peterson based on this application. It's insane. Jordan Peterson shouldn't even have answered the question. He should have just said, are you serious? Is this seriously what you think of me? Because if you think this, you've lost all credibility with me and everyone sensible watching this.
I asked Twitter about you, and this is one of the things Twitter said. Peterson is a man telling men to be good people responsible for selves and behaviour. Yep, that's sorely needed. Peterson gives volition back to those who've succumbed to victimhood. And I think you'd agree with that. And I think we'd all say that's a good thing. But what I wonder, reading the book 12 Rules for Life, is where's respect? The book is a me Bible. I can't think of another book of its kind, a self-help book or a religious book for that matter, that doesn't include as one of its rules respect for other people. You haven't done that, and I assume it's deliberate.
I don't think that that's true in the least. I mean, one of the things that distinguishes my work, say, from the work of someone like Ayn Rand, is that I make the case continually that there's no such thing as atomized individuality. And so, for example, if you're going to treat yourself properly, which you should, you have to treat yourself as an iterated process across time properly. So you today, you tomorrow, you next week, you next month, you when you're old. You're already a community if you're going to treat yourself properly. And if you treat yourself properly, you're going to take into account your family, and you're also going to take into account your community, all simultaneously. But the right place to start is with the things that are within your local control, and there's some humility in that. It certainly has nothing to do with instantaneous self-gratification or selfishness.
You must have been aware it was an unusual thing to do, though, to not make that point more clearly.
Jordan Peterson does a great job of expressing his perspective on this issue. Simon Wilson cannot fault him on this perspective because it is rational, reasonable, humble, and sympathetic. What Jordan Peterson does not do is identify the reasoning behind Simon Wilson's question. He does not call Simon Wilson out on the disingenuous nature of the question. I will. Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist. We live in a society. In order to be a happy person, a productive person, a valuable person to society, one must learn to live effectively within that society. Having respect for and showing respect to other people is necessary in order to function effectively in society. Those who do not show respect to others within society are flawed individuals. They are not functioning effectively. I talk about this to some extent in my video about the strong black woman. I've met many people who have been deeply affected by Jordan Peterson's writings and lectures. It's clear to me that Jordan Peterson understands the necessity of having respect for and showing respect to other people. But in order to help somebody who has trouble with this, it is necessary to address fundamental flaws in the person. The flaws that are restricting them from expressing the typical respect that one person would ordinarily show another person within society. Nobody needs a self-help book to tell them to be respectful to other people. You hear this from your mother, from your father, from television, from teachers, from everyone in society all the time. This is ubiquitously understood by everyone in every culture throughout the world. If Jordan Peterson included in any of his books the sentence, "You should show respect to other people," it would be an absurdly obvious suggestion. He might as well suggest something like, in order to live longer, breathe air, eat food occasionally, and drink water. Granted, Jordan Peterson often expresses ideas that have traditionally been considered to be common sense, but these are typically ideas that are not ubiquitously understood within our culture. The truth is, Simon Wilson is not asking Jordan Peterson why he didn't include this suggestion within his books because he believes that men suffer from a lack of respect for their fellow human beings. The reason he has asked this question is because he is leading Jordan Peterson toward an idea that he believes will effectively criticize Jordan Peterson's position on gender pronouns. He's trying to make the point that human beings should show respect to other human beings, and therefore we should all call transgender people by their preferred pronouns because, in Simon Wilson's view, this is an appropriately respectful way to interact with transgender people. And he has a point. Throughout time, we have valued some people over others, and we typically give a little bit more respect to those people. A king is traditionally referred to as Your Highness. A judge is typically referred to as Your Honor. Even older people in most cultures are referred to with some kind of formal expression of respect. And indeed, calling a man girly or calling a woman mannish has always been disrespectful. However, I will never call a man a woman if it is clear to me that the person in question was born with a penis. In the same way, I will never call a crazy person on the streets of Hollywood Your Highness merely because they insist that they are British royalty. Actually, I take that back. As a matter of principle, I am not inclined to call a man a woman merely because they insist upon it. However, in order to avoid a crazy person screaming at me in public, I may in fact occasionally go along with it because sometimes, honestly, it's just not worth it. But as a matter of principle, I do not accept that guys who pretend to be women are actually women. I am perfectly happy to indulge children in games of make-believe, but I'd rather like to constrain myself to the parameters of reality when conversing with adults. All right, I am splitting this thing into two parts, so if you want to continue watching, just click the link at the end of this video. But that is it for me, for now. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant, it's just that they know so much that isn't so. Good night.
Those who would trade our freedom for the soup kitchen of the welfare state have told us they have a utopian solution, a peace without victory. They call their policy accommodation. They say we offer simple answers to complex problems. Well, perhaps there is a simple answer. That we want our national policy based on what we know in our hearts is morally right.